My father kicked me out for quitting my job. "I'm not going to support a dreamer," he said. I left in silence. 6 months later, he applied for a job at my company. "I'm not going to support a dreamer." My father's words hit me like a slap across the face. His weathered hands gripped the edge of our kitchen table, knuckles white with tension. I stood across from him, feeling small despite my 24 years of life. Just 10 minutes earlier, I had walked into our modest suburban home, determined to finally tell my parents about my decision. I had rehearsed this conversation for weeks, prepared counter-arguments for every objection I anticipated. But nothing could have prepared me for the cold fury in my father's eyes. "Dad, please. This isn't some random impulse," I explained, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I've been developing this software for months. There's real potential here." "Potential?" He practically spat the word. "Potential doesn't pay bills, Franklin. Stability does. That accounting job at Parker & Associates was solid. Benefits, pension plan. And you just threw it away." My mother sat silently at the table, her eyes fixed on her hands. Carol Winters had always been the mediator in our family, the calm in the storm, but tonight she seemed defeated, unwilling to step between me and my father. "Richard, maybe we should listen to what Franklin has to," she began, but my father cut her off with a sharp gesture. "No, Carol, we've listened enough. 2 years of college debt we helped pay, getting him that internship through my connections, all for what? So he can chase some pipe dream?" I glanced at the living room wall, where my business degree from State University hung next to my brother's achievements. James, the doctor, Michael, the lawyer, and me, the disappointment, apparently. "It's not a pipe dream," I said quietly. "The prototype is working. I've already got interest from 2 potential investors." "Investors?" my father scoffed. "You know how many so-called startups fail in the first year? 90%. You want to be in that 90%, Franklin." The kitchen felt smaller by the second. Through the window, I could see our neighbor's porch light flicker on. The Johnsons probably heard everything. In this house, with its thin walls and crowded rooms, privacy had always been a luxury we couldn't afford. "I'd rather try and fail than spend my life wondering what could have been," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Something changed in my father's expression then. The anger hardened into something colder, more final. He stood up, his chair scraping against the linoleum floor. "Then you can wonder about it somewhere else. I worked 40 years at the same company to provide for this family. I didn't chase fantasies. I didn't have that luxury." He pointed toward the door. "If you're going to throw away everything we've built for you, you won't do it under my roof." "Richard," my mother finally spoke up, rising from her chair. "You can't mean that. He's our son." "He's a grown man making a foolish choice," my father replied, not looking at her. "And grown men face consequences." I stood frozen, the reality of what was happening slowly sinking in. I was being thrown out, disowned, over a dream I believed in more than anything. "How long do I have?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Tonight. Pack your things and go." My mother began to cry softly, but she didn't contradict him. She never did, not when it really mattered. I went to my room without another word. The space I'd called mine since childhood suddenly felt foreign. Robotically, I pulled my duffel bag from under the bed and began filling it with essentials: clothes, toiletries, my laptop and hard drives. My entire future was stored on them. The $800 in emergency cash I kept hidden in an old textbook. Through the wall, I could hear my parents arguing in hushed, urgent tones, my mother's pleading, my father's resolute responses. I tried not to listen. An hour later, I stood at our front door, bag in hand. My mother hugged me tightly, pressing something into my palm, a small silver pendant of St. Christopher she'd always kept on her nightstand. "Call me when you're settled," she whispered, her eyes red-rimmed. "Please." My father stood in the hallway, arms crossed. We looked at each other for what felt like eternity. "When you're ready to get serious about your life, you can come back," he said. I nodded once, turned, and walked out into the cool evening air, the door closing behind me with terrible finality. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I did, I might break. And breaking wasn't an option anymore. I was on my own now, with nothing but a bag of clothes, my computer, and a dream no one believed in but me. Walking away from the only home I'd ever known, I made a silent promise to myself. I would either make this work or die trying. What I didn't know then was how much of myself I would lose and find along the way. The first 3 weeks after leaving my parents' house were the hardest of my life. I spent them on Jason's lumpy pull-out couch in his one-bedroom apartment downtown. Jason, my college roommate, didn't ask questions when I showed up at his door that night with a duffel bag and red-rimmed eyes. He just moved his gaming setup aside and made space for me. "Stay as long as you need, man," he said, handing me a spare key and a beer. "Just don't eat my Lucky Charms." By day, I worked at a coffee shop 8 blocks away, the only place that would hire me without references or a permanent address. By night, I hunched over my laptop, refining my software for small business inventory management. Hours blurred together as I subsisted on ramen noodles and determination. My brothers called exactly once. James, the eldest, didn't bother with pleasantries. "You need to apologize to Dad," he said, his doctor's voice clinical and detached. "How you're breaking Mom's heart with this stunt." "It's not a stunt," I replied, staring out Jason's grimy window at the brick wall of the neighboring building. "Whatever you want to call it, it ends now. Come home, get your old job back, or find a new one. Be sensible." Michael, the lawyer, took the phone next. "You're making a mistake, Franklin," he said softly, his tone more sympathetic, but no less condescending. "I know people who could hire you tomorrow. Good salary, benefits. Don't throw away your future on this project." I hung up without responding. They had chosen sides, and it wasn't mine. 3 weeks stretched into 6. Jason never complained, but I knew I was overstaying my welcome. His girlfriend had started giving me the look, the one that said I was an unwanted third wheel in their relationship. I needed to find my own place, but my barista salary barely covered food and the minimum payments on my student loans. One particularly cold Tuesday evening, I sat at a corner table in the coffee shop after my shift, nursing a lukewarm cup and staring at my dwindling bank account on my phone screen. I had $342 left from my savings. The weight of failure pressed on my shoulders like a physical thing. "Is this seat taken?" I looked up to find a man about my age standing across from me, holding a laptop bag and a cappuccino. He had the disheveled look of someone who also worked too many hours on too little sleep. "All yours," I replied, gesturing to the empty chair. Instead of sitting in silence like most coffee shop patrons, he glanced at my screen. "Coding something?" he asked, nodding toward my laptop, where lines of script filled the display. I almost shut the lid. I'd grown protective of my work, but something about his genuinely curious expression made me pause. "Inventory management software," I said cautiously, "for small businesses." His eyebrows rose. "Really, what's your angle? That market's pretty saturated." For some reason, I told him, about the automatic integration with point-of-sale systems, about the predictive ordering algorithms, about the simplified user interface designed for non-tech-savvy business owners. He listened intently, asking pointed, knowledgeable questions that revealed he wasn't just making conversation. When I finished, he extended his hand. "I'm Alex Chen. I work in software development too, or I did until my company downsized last month." We talked until the baristas started stacking chairs on tables, a clear signal it was closing time. Alex had worked for 3 years at a mid-sized tech company before they cut his entire department. He knew the industry, had connections with investors, and most importantly, saw the potential in my software that my family couldn't or wouldn't. "We should partner up," he said as we stood outside in the chilly night air. "Your code, my business experience, 50-50. What do you think?" I hesitated, years of my father's warnings about trusting strangers echoing in my head. But what choice did I have? I was nearly broke, homeless in all but name, and my family had written me off as a failure. "Let me think about it," I replied. That night, a small envelope arrived at Jason's apartment, addressed to me in familiar, delicate handwriting. Inside was a check for $2,000 and a note that brought tears to my eyes. "Franklin, your grandfather was a dreamer too. Everyone told him his repair shop would fail. It sustained our family for 30 years. This money was meant for your birthday next month. I think you need it more now. Don't tell your father. All my love, Grandma Rose. I sat on the edge of the pull-out couch, the check trembling in my hand. It wasn't just the money, though God knew I needed it. It was knowing that someone from my family still believed in me. The next morning, I called Alex. "I'm in," I said without preamble. "Partners." 2 days later, we signed paperwork in a small legal office downtown, officially forming Winter Chen Solutions. Alex contributed $5,000 he'd been saving for a down payment on a condo. Combined with my grandmother's gift, we had enough to rent a tiny office space in an aging building on the edge of the business district and survive for about 3 months. The office had water stains on the ceiling tiles and flickering fluorescent lights, but it was ours. The day we moved in, I set my laptop on the scratched desk and felt something I hadn't experienced since leaving home: possibility. That evening, as Alex and I shared cheap takeout on the floor of our new office, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Dad found out about Grandma's check. He's very angry. Please call her. She needs to know you're okay." I stared at the message, my food forgotten. Even my grandmother's small act of faith in me had consequences. The familiar weight of guilt and anger settled in my stomach. "Everything okay?" Alex asked, noticing my expression. I put my phone away and forced a smile. "Yeah, just family stuff." "Want to talk about it?" I shook my head. "Not really. Let's focus on the business plan for tomorrow." What I didn't tell him was that my father's rejection still burned like an open wound, or that part of me had started this journey out of spite as much as passion, or that despite everything, I still checked my phone every day, hoping for a message saying, "Come home. I was wrong." It never came. The office lights hummed overhead as Alex and I worked late into the night. Outside, the city continued its relentless pace, indifferent to our small struggles, but for the first time since I'd walked out of my parents' house, I felt something like hope taking root. Tomorrow would be another day of struggle, but at least now, I wasn't facing it alone. 3 months into our partnership, Winter Chen Solutions was still running on fumes. Our office furniture consisted of 2 folding tables, mismatched chairs from a thrift store, and a coffee maker that made suspicious grinding noises. But the software was taking shape, sleeker, faster, and more intuitive than I'd originally envisioned. "We need to start pitching," Alex said one morning, setting a cardboard cup of convenience store coffee on my desk. "The prototype is solid enough for demos." I nodded, though my stomach clenched at the thought. Coding in isolation was one thing, standing in front of potential investors was another. Public speaking had never been my strong suit, another disappointment to my father, who could command a room with a few well-placed words. "I've set up 3 meetings for next week," Alex continued, pulling up his calendar. 2 with angel investors, and 1 with the owner of that chain of local hardware stores. They're exactly the kind of client we're targeting. I swallowed hard. "You'll do most of the talking, right?" Alex shook his head. "This is your baby, Franklin. No one can explain it better than you." The next week passed in a blur of preparation. I practiced my pitch in front of the bathroom mirror until Jason threatened to smother me in my sleep. Alex drilled me on potential questions, his criticism constructive but relentless. "You need to look people in the eye," he reminded me for the 100th time, "and stop apologizing when they ask tough questions." The first 2 pitches went exactly as I feared. The investors listened politely, asked a few questions, then delivered variations of "interesting, but not for us." One suggested we pivot to mobile gaming apps, which showed he hadn't understood our concept at all. By the time we arrived at Rodriguez Hardware's corporate office, a generous term for what was essentially the back room of their flagship store, my confidence was at rock bottom. "Maybe you should handle this one," I muttered as we waited in the small reception area. Alex squeezed my shoulder. "You've got this. Remember, Manuel Rodriguez built this business from nothing. He understands what it's like to start small." Before I could respond, a short, barrel-chested man with salt and pepper hair emerged from the back office. "You must be the software guys," he said, shaking our hands with a grip that made my fingers ache. "Manuel Rodriguez, come on in." His office was cramped but organized, the walls lined with photos of store openings and community events. A framed picture on his desk showed a younger Manuel standing proudly in front of a tiny storefront. "That was my first location," he said, noticing my gaze. 600 square feet of retail space and more debt than inventory. Now we have 8 stores across 3 counties. He leaned back in his chair. "So convince me why I need your software." I took a deep breath and began my pitch. This time, something was different. Maybe it was Manuel's attentive expression, or the fact that he occasionally nodded in understanding. Whatever the reason, I found my rhythm, explaining the pain points our software solved, demonstrating the interface on my laptop. "The biggest problem for businesses like yours," I said, gaining confidence, "is inventory management across multiple locations. When your West Side store is out of a product that's overstocked at North Side, that's lost revenue. Our system tracks inventory in real time across all locations, automates reordering based on sales patterns, and eliminates the need for those time-consuming manual inventory counts." Manuel leaned forward, studying the screen. "And this integrates with our existing point-of-sale system?" "Seamlessly," I assured him. "We built it to be compatible with all major retail systems." For the next hour, he peppered us with questions, some I'd prepared for, others that forced me to think on my feet. By the end, we were hunched over my laptop, discussing specific features he wanted to see. "I like what I'm seeing," Manuel finally said, leaning back. "It's not perfect yet, but I can see the potential." Alex and I exchanged glances. Was this really happening? "We're offering a 6-month pilot program," Alex said smoothly. "Reduced rate, full support, and we'll customize features based on your feedback." Manuel nodded slowly. "Let's do it. 1 location to start, then we'll see." Outside in the parking lot, Alex and I maintained our professional composure until Manuel was out of sight. Then we both erupted, Alex whooping loudly while I stood in stunned silence. "We did it," I whispered, the reality slowly sinking in. "We actually did it." "You did it," Alex corrected, clapping me on the back. "That was all you in there." That night, I sat alone in our tiny office, staring at the signed contract on my desk. Our first real client, first real revenue, first validation that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't chasing an impossible dream. I picked up my phone, scrolling to my mother's number. We still texted occasionally, brief messages about nothing important. She never mentioned my father or asked when I was coming home. I never asked how he was doing. Before I could overthink it, I snapped a photo of the contract and sent it to her with a simple message. "First client signed today." 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared, reappeared, disappeared again. Finally, a single message. "I'm so proud of you." I stared at those 5 words, something tight and painful unwinding in my chest. Not "your father would be proud." Not "we always believed in you." Just her acknowledging my small victory. It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation. It wasn't an invitation home. But in that moment, it was enough. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and looked around our shabby office with new eyes. The water stains and flickering lights were still there, but now they seemed less like signs of failure and more like badges of authenticity. Every successful company had an origin story. This was just the opening chapter of ours. Tomorrow we'd start building Rodriguez's customized system. Soon we'd need to hire help. The road ahead was still uncertain, full of potential pitfalls and failures. But for tonight I allowed myself to savor this one small victory. And somewhere, in a corner of my heart I tried to ignore, I wished my father could see me now. 8 months after our first client signing, Winter Chen Solutions had gone from a desperate gamble to a modest success. Rodriguez Hardware had expanded our system to all 8 of their locations. Their glowing recommendation had brought us 3 more small retail chains. We'd moved to a larger office, still nothing fancy, but with actual desks and chairs that didn't wobble. We'd even hired 2 junior developers to help with the expanding workload. I was in the middle of a code review when my phone buzzed. Grandma Rose's name flashed on the screen. My heart skipped. She rarely called during business hours. "Grandma? Is everything okay?" Her voice came through strained and thin. "Franklin, dear. She paused, took a breath. "Your father lost his job yesterday." I sat back in my chair, a confusing mix of emotions washing over me. After 40 years at the same manufacturing company, my father had risen to senior management. The company was an institution in our town, stable, reliable, just like him. What happened, I asked, struggling to keep my voice neutral. The company's being sold. New owners from overseas, she explained. They're downsizing the entire management team. Your father, he didn't take it well. I could imagine. Richard Winters had based his entire identity on being the reliable provider, the man who never chased dreams because he was too busy building security. Now that security had evaporated overnight, "Is he looking for another position?" I asked. A long pause. "Franklin, he's 58. In this economy." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I knew what happened to men like my father in today's job market. Companies wanted younger managers with fresh ideas and lower salary expectations. The very stability my father had prized, 4 decades at one company, now made him seem inflexible, outdated. "How's Mom handling it?" Another pause. "She's applied for a cashier position at Wilson's Grocery. Part-time, but it's something." I closed my eyes, picturing my mother, who had devoted her life to supporting my father's career and raising 3 sons, standing behind a register, scanning groceries for neighbors who would whisper about the Winters family's fall from grace. "I should go," I said abruptly. "I have a meeting." "Of course, dear. I just thought you should know." After hanging up, I sat motionless, staring at the wall. Alex noticed my expression when he came in with lunch. "Bad news?" he asked, setting a sandwich on my desk. My father lost his job. Alex knew the basics of my situation, that I'd left home under bad circumstances, that my relationship with my father was essentially non-existent. He also knew better than to offer platitudes. "What are you thinking?" he asked simply. I shook my head. "I don't know." That night I dreamed of my childhood home. In the dream it was empty, echoing. I walked from room to room calling out, but no one answered. I woke with a start at 3 a.m., drenched in sweat, a hollowness in my chest that coffee and coding couldn't fill. 2 weeks later, my sister-in-law Jenny, James's wife, texted me, "Your dad had a job interview today. Didn't go well. He's not handling this well, Franklin." I didn't respond. What could I say? That I was sorry? That I understood what it felt like to have the foundation of your life crumble beneath you? The irony wasn't lost on me. Through Grandma Rose and occasional updates from Jenny, I pieced together what was happening at home. My father had applied for dozens of positions, each rejection cutting deeper than the last. Companies that had once respected his experience now saw it as a liability. One interviewer had actually suggested he may not be a cultural fit for our dynamic environment, corporate speak for too old. My mother had gotten the grocery job. The pay was minimum wage, the hours inconsistent. She came home with aching feet and forced smiles, insisting she enjoyed the work. My father couldn't look her in the eye anymore. One evening, Alex and I were working late, preparing for a meeting with our largest potential client yet, a regional chain of 37 stores. If we landed this account, we'd need to double our staff, maybe even consider outside investment to scale properly. "You're distracted," Alex observed as I stared at the same slide for 10 minutes straight. "I'm fine," I said automatically. Alex saved the presentation and closed his laptop. "Franklin, talk to me." The words spilled out before I could stop them. About my father's situation, about the increasingly worrying updates from home, about the dreams that wouldn't stop. "I feel like I should do something," I admitted. But then I remember how he threw me out, how he called me a dreamer like it was the worst insult possible. Alex was quiet for a moment. "You know, my father left when I was 8. Just packed up one day and disappeared." He rarely spoke about his family. For years I fantasized about becoming successful enough that he'd see me on TV or something and regret leaving. Did it work? A sad smile. "I have no idea where he is. Probably doesn't even know I'm alive." He looked at me directly. "The difference is, you know exactly where your father is, and whatever happened between you, he gave you 18 good years before those bad 6 months." I looked away, uncomfortable with the truth in his words. I'm not saying forgive and forget, Alex continued. Just don't make decisions based on spite. They have a way of hollowing you out over time. That night, I drove past my parents' house for the first time in nearly a year. The lawn, once meticulously maintained by my father every Saturday morning, was overgrown. The garage door, which needed repainting, was partially open, revealing stacked boxes inside, signs of downsizing, of preparation for what might come next. I slowed but didn't stop. What would I even say? Sorry your life fell apart, but remember when you told me I was throwing mine away? The petty thought made me ashamed. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of my father through the living room window. Even from a distance, I could see how much he had aged, shoulders stooped, hair grayer than I remembered. He was staring at what looked like papers spread across the coffee table. Bills, probably. Or rejection letters. For the first time since I'd left home, I felt no satisfaction in his struggles, only a hollow sadness that echoed the empty rooms of my dream. The next day, Grandma Rose called again. The bank sent a final notice, she said without preamble. If they don't make the next mortgage payment, foreclosure proceedings begin. I gripped the phone tighter. How much time do they have? 30 days, she said. Franklin, they're thinking of selling the house before it comes to that. Your mother is devastated. The home where I'd grown up, where I'd built my first computer, where I'd dreamed of creating something that mattered. I'll call you back, I told her, mind already racing. That evening, as I sat in my apartment staring at my laptop screen, an email notification popped up from Rodriguez Hardware's HR department. Interesting resume came across my desk today, it read. Thought you might want to take a look before we proceed. Attached was a PDF file. I clicked it open, then froze, staring at the name at the top, Richard Winters. I stared at my father's resume until my eyes burned. Richard Winters, 58. 40 years of experience in operations management. Proficient in legacy systems. References available upon request. The clinical summary of a life dedicated to stability and responsibility. I hadn't known Manuel Rodriguez was hiring for a senior operations position, hadn't known my father had applied. The coincidence felt like some cosmic joke or test. You okay? Alex asked, finding me still at my desk well past midnight. You look like you've seen a ghost. Wordlessly, I turned my laptop toward him. He scanned the resume, eyes widening as understanding dawned. Your father applied to Rodriguez Hardware. Did he know your connection? I shook my head. No way. He probably applied to dozens of places. I laughed hollowly. Rodriguez Hardware of all places. Our first client. Alex pulled up a chair. What are you going to do? That was the question, wasn't it? I had options, each with its own bitter taste. I could ignore the email, pretend I never saw it. I could forward it with a simple, not recommended note, effectively blackballing my own father. Or I could... I need to think, I said, closing my laptop. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's face as he told me to leave. Then I'd see him hunched over bills at the coffee table, aged beyond his years. The two images warred in my mind until dawn broke. The next morning, I called Grandma Rose. How bad is it, really? I asked without preamble. She sighed heavily. They've gone through most of their savings. Your mother's job barely covers groceries. The medical insurance from your father's company ends next month. She paused. Your father. He's not the man he was, Franklin. This broke something in him. I closed my eyes, remembering the proud, stubborn man who had raised me, who had taught me to ride a bike, helped with my science projects, worked double shifts to pay for my first computer, the same man who had thrown me out for daring to follow a path he couldn't understand. Has he been getting interviews at least? I asked. A few, no offers. Her voice softened. He's too proud to say it, but I think he knows his age is against him. Companies want young men like you, not old warhorses like him. The irony wasn't lost on me. My father had prioritized stability in a world that no longer valued it. I had embraced risk in a field that rewarded it. We had both been right, in our own ways, but the timing had favored me. After hanging up, I called Manuel Rodriguez directly. I need a favor, I said after pleasantries. There's a resume that came across your desk. Richard Winters. Can you hold off on making a decision until next week? I'd like to look into it personally. Manuel agreed easily, trusting my judgment after months of successful partnership. For the next few days, I threw myself into work, avoiding the decision looming over me. We landed the regional chain account, a victory that should have had me celebrating. Instead, I felt hollow, distracted. On Friday afternoon, Alex dropped a folder on my desk. "What's this?" I asked. "Research," he replied cryptically. Inside was a printout of Rodriguez Hardware's operational challenges, inventory discrepancies between stores, supply chain inefficiencies, staff scheduling issues, the exact problems a seasoned operations manager would be hired to solve. Our software handles some of this, I noted, flipping through the pages. But not all, Alex pointed out. Technology is only part of the solution. They need someone who understands retail operations from the ground up. I looked up at him, understanding dawning. Someone like my father. Alex shrugged. I'm just saying he might actually be qualified. This isn't charity. That night I drove again to my parents' house, this time stopping in the driveway. The porch light was on, casting a warm glow that belied the turmoil inside. I sat in my car for nearly an hour, rehearsing what I might say, before finally driving away without knocking. On Monday morning, I made my decision. I called Rodriguez's HR department. I'd like to set up an interview with Richard Winters, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, but I have a specific request about how it's handled. The HR manager sounded confused, but agreed to my conditions. Richard Winters would be interviewed for the operations manager position, but my name and connection to Winter Chen Solutions would be kept confidential. As far as my father would know, he was interviewing with a standard hiring committee. That evening, I received a text from my mother, our first direct communication in weeks. Your father has an interview at Rodriguez Hardware tomorrow. He's nervous, but trying not to show it. Wish him luck? I stared at the message, unable to form a reply. Luck had nothing to do with what was about to happen. The next day, I arrived at Rodriguez's corporate office an hour early, my stomach in knots. Manuel greeted me with a knowing smile. You sure about this? He asked. Family business can get messy. I'm not sure about anything, I admitted, but I need to do this. Manuel nodded. Conference room is ready. We told him 10 a.m. I sequestered myself in Manuel's private office, pacing like a caged animal as the minutes ticked by. At 9:58, Manuel's assistant knocked softly. Mr. Winters is here. Through the partially open blinds, I caught my first close look at my father in nearly a year. His hair had indeed gone grayer, and he'd lost weight. But he was impeccably dressed in his interview suit, the same one he'd worn to countless company functions over the years. He sat stiffly in the reception area, hands clasped back straight, proud even now. At exactly 10 a.m., the HR manager led him to the conference room. I gave them 15 minutes, enough time for introductions and preliminary questions, before I took a deep breath and followed. As I pushed open the conference room door, time seemed to slow. My father was mid-sentence, explaining something about his inventory management experience. He looked up as I entered. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Recognition, confusion, then shock passed across his face in rapid succession. Franklin? I nodded, suddenly unable to find the words I'd rehearsed for days. Manuel and the HR manager discreetly excused themselves, leaving us alone in the too large, too quiet room. My father stared at me, then at the Winter Chen Solutions logo on the folder in front of him, understanding slowly dawning. This is your company? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. One of the founders, I corrected automatically. He looked down at his hands, then back at me, his expression unreadable. I think, he said slowly, carefully, we have a lot to talk about. The conference room felt airless, as if the walls were slowly closing in. My father and I sat across from each other, separated by a polished table and years of unspoken words. How long have you known? He finally asked, breaking the silence. About your application, a few days. I kept my voice neutral, professional. About your situation, longer. He nodded slowly, a muscle working in his jaw. The same tension I remembered from countless dinner table disagreements over the years. Then he did something unexpected. He laughed, a short, dry sound with no humor in it. So this was what? Some kind of test? No, I said firmly. This is a legitimate position that Rodriguez Hardware needs to fill. You're qualified for it. But you arranged this interview. It wasn't a question. Yes. My father leaned back, studying me with new eyes. The initial shock had faded, replaced by something more complex. Wariness, confusion, maybe a hint of pride he couldn't quite suppress. Your mother doesn't know, does she? That you're involved with Rodriguez? I shook my head. No one in the family does, except Grandma Rose. She's kept my secrets, just as she had kept his over the years. He glanced down at the folder in front of him, running a finger over the embossed Winter Chen Solutions logo. Winter Chen, he murmured. You're the Winter. Co-founder, I confirmed. Alex Chen is my partner. And this software, it's what you were working on when you left. The careful way he phrased it, when you left, not when I threw you out, wasn't lost on me. We were both rewriting history in real time, choosing our words with surgical precision. It's evolved since then. But yes, essentially. He nodded again, processing. Then he straightened his shoulders, assuming the posture I recognized from my childhood, my father preparing to take control of a situation. Well, he said briskly, I appreciate you setting up the interview, but I don't need charity. Especially not from... He stopped himself, but I could fill in the blank. Especially not from my son. It's not charity, I said, echoing Alex's words. Manuel needs someone with your experience. Our software handles the technical side, but they need a human element, someone who understands operations from years in the trenches, not just theory. And you think that's me. I know it's you. Our eyes met across the table, and for a moment I glimpsed the uncertainty behind his carefully constructed facade. My father, who had always been so sure of everything, was lost. The realization hit me with unexpected force. He was just a man, as fallible and frightened as anyone. The position reports directly to Manuel, I continued, keeping my voice businesslike. You'd be working with our software, but not for me. The connection between Winter Chen and your employment would be minimal. He straightened his tie, a nervous gesture I'd seen countless times growing up. And if I say no, I shrugged, trying to project a casualness I didn't feel. Then you say no. Rodriguez will find someone else. You'll find another opportunity. The lie tasted bitter. We both knew those opportunities were dwindling by the day. My father looked down at his hands, strong hands that had always provided, always protected, now clasped tightly to hide their slight tremor. Your mother's been working at Wilson's, he said abruptly. Cashier, did you know that? I nodded, throat tight. She comes home with her feet swollen, but she never complains. He swallowed hard. 35 years, I never let her work. Now she's scanning groceries for people we used to have over for dinner. The pain in his voice was raw, real. For the first time, I understood what this past year had cost him, not just financially, but in his sense of self, his identity as provider and protector. Take the job, Dad, I said quietly. The word Dad felt strange on my tongue after so long. He looked up sharply, maybe at the directness of my tone, maybe at the title I hadn't used since leaving home. Because you feel sorry for me? Because you're good at what you do, I replied. Because Manuel needs someone like you. Because... I hesitated, then finished honestly. Because I'd rather see you rebuild than watch you break. Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a recognition. For a moment, I saw myself reflected in his eyes. Not the failure he'd once condemned, but something else entirely. He cleared his throat. This software of yours, how does it work, exactly? Relief washed over me. I opened my laptop and began explaining the system, watching as his initial skepticism gave way to genuine interest. He asked sharp, perceptive questions that showed he was grasping the concepts quickly. When I mentioned a supply chain issue we hadn't fully solved, he immediately suggested a practical workaround based on his years of experience. That might actually work, I admitted, making a note. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I may be old-fashioned, but I understand efficiency. By the time Manuel returned an hour later, my father and I were deep in conversation about inventory management approaches, the air between us no longer crackling with tension, but alive with something new, mutual respect. "So," Manuel said, glancing between us, "how are we doing in here?" My father stood, extending his hand. "Mr. Rodriguez, I'd like to formally accept the position, if it's still being offered." Manuel grinned. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Winters. When can you start?" "Monday," my father said firmly. Then, with a glance at me, "I have some family matters to settle first." Those family matters began that evening when I pulled into my parents' driveway for the third time that week. But this time I turned off the engine and walked to the door. My mother answered, her eyes widening in shock. "Franklin!" She reached for me as if I might be a mirage, her fingers trembling against my cheek. "Oh God, you're really here." Behind her I could see the living room, boxes stacked against walls, shelves half emptied, preparation for the downsizing they thought was inevitable. "I heard Dad got a job," I said simply. Her smile was radiant, despite her obvious exhaustion. "Yes, at Rodriguez Hardware. He just called. It's a management position. A good one." Her voice dropped to a confidential whisper. He sounded like himself again. You know, before he lost his job, before he lost his sense of purpose, before he lost me. "Is he home?" Her smile faltered slightly. "In the backyard. He's been out there since he called. I think he's processing." I found my father standing by the old oak tree, staring up at the wooden swing he'd hung for me when I was 7. In the fading evening light he looked smaller somehow, the larger-than-life figure of my childhood reduced to human scale. He heard my approach but didn't turn. "Your mother doesn't know, does she? About your connection to Rodriguez?" "No," I admitted. "I thought that should be your choice to share or not." He nodded slowly, still facing away. "Thank you for that." We stood in silence, watching as the day's last light filtered through the leaves. So many things remained unsaid between us. Apologies, explanations, justifications. Perhaps they always would. "The house was going into foreclosure," he said finally. "Another month and we'd have lost it." "I know." He turned to face me then, his expression carefully composed. "When you left, when I made you leave, I was certain you were making a terrible mistake. I know that too. I was wrong." The words seemed to cost him physically, each syllable dragged from some deep, painful place. About a lot of things. It wasn't the dramatic apology part of me had fantasized about during those first bitter months. There was no falling to knees, no tearful begging for forgiveness. Just a simple acknowledgement, offered man to man. And somehow, it was enough. "We were both right," I said, surprising myself. "And we were both wrong. You built security for this family the best way you knew how. I needed to build something of my own." My father nodded slowly, a cautious understanding passing between us. Not forgiveness exactly. The wounds were still too fresh for that, but perhaps the beginning of something new, something better. "Your company," he said. "Winter Chen, it's doing well?" "Very well," I confirmed. "We just signed our largest client yet." A faint smile touched his lips. "I'd like to hear about it sometime. If you're willing." "I'd like that too." As we walked back toward the house where my mother waited anxiously at the window, I realized that some dreams cost more than others. Some successes taste bittersweet. But the price of finding my own path, as high as it had seemed a year ago, had ultimately been worth paying. And now perhaps it was time to build something else, a bridge back to the family I'd left behind. Not because I needed them anymore, not because I had anything to prove, but because some bonds, though stretched and frayed by pride and pain, never truly break. They just wait patiently, to be rewoven into something stronger than before.